Well, I can do this without a mic.
You'll say, just yell, Chris.
You should be okay. But you have to be somewhat in front of it.
I can do this without a mic. So, just so that everyone is aware, I ran through this with y'all. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much. We're so excited to have Christopher here. This is amazing. Thank you for this amazing turnout. Just as a reminder, we're going to do the speaking portion and the Q&A portion in here, and then once that is concluded, we're going to have everybody leave the music department, and then we'll call you back in by the group number that is on your wristband. We'll get you through the line sign very quickly. If you want a picture, please make sure that you have your camera app pulled up on your phone, and one of our booksellers will grab that phone, take a picture for you, hand it back, along with your signed book, and you'll be on your way. Thank you guys so much for your cooperation. This is going to be an amazing night. Thank you.
Apologies for those of you who are sitting in front of the microphone. You're going to be deaf by the end of this evening. My apologies to you for getting here a little bit later today. This is my only event on the tour without my publicist with me, and when you have an author without a publicist, he shows up late. This is also why authors are bad at meeting deadlines. Deadlines. All right, I'm going to blow out my voice today. Today is very special for me for a couple of reasons. First of all, we actually have a book. And it's not a little one. When The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm came out, I had a guy send me a video on Twitter holding it up saying, "What is this, a book for ants?" Also, a couple other things. This is actually my last stop on my U.S. book tour. And I get to go home for Thanksgiving tomorrow. And then I'm heading out, thank you. And then I'm heading out to Europe until December 16th. Yeah, but it is an amazing experience for me to be able to tour for this series after, as some of you may know, 20 years. And it's true that the hardcover edition of Aragon came out 20 years ago with Random House, which is, I'm going to try this one more time, really, really astounding to me that people are still reading the series, still reading Aragon, and enjoying it. And it's been longer than that, in fact, because I actually...
Try to move your hand up on the microphone.
Shall I try that? Better? No. Let's try that. Oh, I think I know what's happening. The battery is losing contact.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Need some tape.
Use magic.
There we go. Pull it in like this. I think that'll do it. I actually started working on this series all the way back in 1998.
Wow.
Yeah, and if you do the math, that's 25 years of thinking about, talking about, and working on this series, which is pretty crazy. You know, I once did an event with a wireless mic, and it started picking up the local police channel. All the kids thought that was pretty funny. Yeah, and then I keep losing the track of my train of thought because of this mic. It's really been an amazing journey, and I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into writing the series, a little bit about what it's been like. I'll do a couple of short readings, assuming the mic cooperates. And then I'll take a few Q&As, and then we'll do some Q&A, and then of course we'll sign some books. And if I start boring you, you let me know, and I'll do handstands up here instead. So you see me here today as a published author, and I've been doing this for over 20 years. Oh, I know what I was going to say. A couple of days ago actually marked my 40th birthday. Yeah. And I went and checked my calendar, and 20 years ago, when I was 20, I was on the road touring for Aragon. So yeah, to be doing it now at 40 for the same series, it's pretty cool. And also, Murtagh debuted at #1 on the New York Times list. So thank you, seriously. Talk about a birthday present. So anyway, you see me here today as a published author and as someone who's been doing this a long time. And if you're one of my younger readers, especially, you might look at me and think, oh, well, Christopher's a writer. He must have always enjoyed reading and writing. Well, the truth is that when I was very young and I was learning how to read and write, I absolutely hated it. Now, I was homeschooled my whole life, so my mom was my teacher, and fortunately for me, she is a trained Montessori teacher, so I really lucked out. And I remember marching up to her as a little kid and going, I hate to read. I'm never going to use reading for the rest of my life. Fortunately for me, she didn't listen to me, and she kept teaching me. And then eventually she took me to the public library and where we were living, which at the time was in Anchorage, Alaska. Now, if you've never been to Alaska, it's a beautiful place. I remember our neighbors would be out mowing their lawns at midnight during the summertime because there was still light in the sky. And then during the winter, the sun just kind of pops up over the horizon, hovers there for a few hours, and then says, nope, and goes right down. Oh, and I don't know if you know this, but they actually have a different species of mosquito up in Alaska. And it's about this big. And because of the permafrost, you get all these pools of standing water everywhere, and you end up with huge black clouds of mosquitoes that sound like swarms of attack drones. One of my earliest memories is my mom taking us to a park and she scooped up my sister and her grabbing me and us running through the park while chased by one of these black clouds of mosquitoes. And of course, if they catch you, they'll drain all the blood out of your body and leave nothing behind but a desiccated corpse. Other than that, a nice place. Gonna try swapping hands here. So, as I said, my mom took me to the... Okay, let's try that. My mom took me to the library, and as I was wandering around in the children's section, I ended up finding a series of slim... You were doing so well. My hand was cramping, that's why I swapped hands. That was a mistake. I ended up finding... You'll never guess. I ended up finding a series of slim detective novels or mystery novels. Now, for the life of me, I cannot remember the author of the books. I can't remember the title of the books, but I do remember that one of the covers caught my attention, and for whatever reason, and so I pulled it off the shelf and I checked it out. And it was the very first book that I ever checked out on my own. And when I started reading it, it was as if a switch just got flipped inside of my head. And instead of just seeing the words on the page, all those strange little black marks, I could actually see the things they were supposed to represent. Instead of seeing the word for sun, I could actually see a sun in my head. I could almost hear the characters. I could almost smell the locations. It was a magical experience. And I really do think, and in fact, although I can't remember the title, I do remember that the story kind of involved tomato sauce being mistaken for blood, which seemed really exciting to little Christopher. But it was a magical experience, and I really do think that reading and writing are the closest things we have to true magic in the world. Because, you could be sitting at home or, in a chair or on the sofa, or you could be in an airplane or anywhere else in the world, And with the right book, you could be flying in a spaceship around Mars, or riding a wild moose in the Yukon, or living someone else's life from thousands of years ago. The possibilities are endless. And there really is nothing else in the world that allows us to experience the world through other people's eyes and emotions and thoughts and feelings, to really get inside their heads. And that is kind of magical. So from that moment on, I read everything I could get my hands on. I was one of those kids who'd go to the library on Monday and get a stack of books and read it through the week, take it back on the next Monday and get another stack. And I did that all through my childhood, all the way growing up. And eventually, I graduated from high school. Now, I graduated from high school at 15, mainly the result of not taking any summer breaks my entire life. Thank you, Mom. Actually, my sister graduated at 14 because she decided it was a race, and she didn't tell me until it was too late to do anything about it. Okay, hold on. I'm going to try swapping hands here. 1 second.
You got this.
No. What is it about that one? Maybe. This is going to be a story for the future.
Next book.
Oh, when I graduated, my first thought was, oh man, this is going to be awesome. No more school. And it was awesome for about 2 weeks. And then I got, and then, as I can't live with that. Okay. And then I got really, really bored. And you want to know how bored I got? Well, you have to understand, we live in rural Montana. The nearest town was a 30-minute drive away and only had 6,000 people, and I didn't drive. Our nearest neighbors were half mile away, and they were 50 years old and owned a construction company. We did not have internet back then. We did not get television reception at our house. I didn't even have a radio. So I got so bored that I went into our backyard and I started to dig a hole. And it was a big hole. It was about twice as wide as this table. I know you probably can't see this table, so it was about 9 feet across, circular, and about 9 feet deep, through solid gravel. And then we had this giant old satellite dish that was abandoned on our property. And for those of you who are younger, satellite dishes used to be absolutely gigantic. This sucker was about 13 feet across. So I dragged it over to the hole and tipped it over to form a roof on top of the hole. And then I went to these dead trees that were standing along the banks of the Yellowstone River, which ran right by our house. And I ripped the bark off those dead trees and took it up to the hole. And I got a bunch of hay bales, because, again, Montana, lots of hay bales. And I put the hay bales on top of the satellite dish for insulation. And then I put the bark, made shingles out of the bark, on top of the hay bales, on top of the satellite dish, on top of the hole. Now, you might be wondering how I actually got into the hole with all that stuff piled on top.
You dug another hole.
No, I didn't dig another hole. I dug a tunnel! And then I went and I started chopping down those dead trees. Now you have to understand, back then I didn't have a hatchet, I didn't have an axe, and I didn't have a saw. So again, I did what any sane person would do, and I chopped those trees down with a claw hammer. I didn't even sharpen the claw hammer. And I dragged those logs up into our backyard, and I started planting them upright in front of the entrance to the tunnel to form the framework for what was going to be a Viking-style mead hall. Now, when you start digging giant holes and building Viking-style mead halls in your backyard, you are officially bored. And if you think I'm making this story up, my very first author photo, portrait, what have you, that appeared in the hardcover edition of the book was taken in that hole. At that point, I realized I had to find something else to do with myself aside from digging giant holes. It was an experience that I kind of wish everyone got to have at least once in their life. where no one was telling me what to do. You know, and it's something you ought to experience at least once. I wasn't in school. I didn't have a job. All I had to worry about was chores around the house and taking care of myself. And in that time, if you have that sort of experience, whatever it is you choose to do when no one's telling you to do anything just might be what you should pursue as a career. And in my case, you know, it could be anything. It could be digging giant holes. It could be playing video games. It could be making video games. It could be anything. In my case, I really enjoyed reading books about dragons. And since riding dragons and fighting monsters wasn't listed under the job opportunities in the local paper, I figured I'd try to write the sort of story I enjoyed reading. So I had tried writing before, but I never got past the first 5 or 6 pages because I never knew what happened past the opening event of the story. You know, boy finds dragon egg. Okay, great, but that's not a story. So I spent about a month and a half, 2 months, working out the world of the series as well as the actual plot of the different books. Now, I actually did something just to prove that I had the story worked out. If you might remember in Aragon, there's the chapter where Aragon drags his uncle Garrow back to the village of Carvajal. And then following that, he has a night of bad fever dreams. Well, one of those fever dreams is actually describes the very last scene in Inheritance. And I put it in there just so I could point to it and say, see? Anyway, once I had a good outline and I felt solid with the world, I started writing. And the first draft of Aragon went really fast because I had no idea what I was doing. So I just had fun with it. I raced through it, and when I was done, I figured, hey, it'd probably be a good idea to read the book. And I was excited. You know, I was getting to read my first book for the first time. This was going to be amazing, right? Ooh. 20 pages in, I realized it sucked. And just so you understand just how bad that first draft was, in the very first draft of Aragon, Aragon wasn't named Aragon. Aragon was named Kevin. Which, if any of you are named Kevin, it's a great name, but I don't think the series would have been half so successful if it had been about the great dragon rider, Kevin. There was also a unicorn in that draft, and you know it's no good then. Come on, dragons are better than unicorns. Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so I spent a good chunk of a year rewriting the book and trying to fix it. And then I gave it to my parents, and fortunately for me, they liked what I'd written, and they said, we think you have something here. Let's try to self-publish it. Because we knew no one in the publishing world, and my parents have always been self-employed, and we were always looking for things we could work on together as a family business. So we spent another chunk of a year doing more editing, formatting the book, and just generally preparing it for publication. And the thing is, as I said, my parents were always self-employed, so during that time they were helping me get Aragon ready for publication. They weren't working on any of the freelance jobs they normally would have been doing to bring in income. So by the time we actually had books in hand, if Aragon had taken another 2 to 3 months to turn a profit, we were going to have to sell our house, move to a city, and get any jobs we could. We bet everything on it. Which makes for a great story now. But man, when you're living through that and you don't know if it's going to turn out okay, stress does not even begin to describe it. The thing is, though, my parents didn't push me into it. This was a joint decision. We all, pushed our chips in and decided to go all in on this. And as a result of that pressure, financial pressure, I was willing to do things that probably would have made me too uncomfortable otherwise, such as cold calling schools and libraries and bookstores and talking them into letting me come and do a presentation to try to sell some books. And that's exactly what I did. I ended up touring all through the western half of the United States, doing events in schools and libraries. I was at one point, at various points actually, doing 2 to 3 one-hour-long presentations every single day in various schools. Which is why you can still wake me up at 3 a.m. in the middle of 3 a.m., put a gun to my head and say, "What's Aragon about, Christopher?" And I can still do it. And the thing is, though, back then, I did all of my presentations while wearing medieval costumes. Black, knee-high, lace-up leather boots, billowy black pantaloons, a big black pirate belt, billowy red swordsman shirt, and a black beret to top it off. Now, the very first presentation I ever did was in our local high school. And they gathered the whole school into the library for me to talk to those kids. I was 17. I had never been in a public school before in my life, and I walked in dressed like that. And when I did, from the back of the room, I heard someone go, "Hello, Romeo!" As you can see, I don't wear that anymore. But since it is the 20th anniversary of the series, I figured a fancy hat was in order. Anyway, after almost a year of touring, we were very fortunate because another author caught wind of the books. A guy by the name of Carl Hyacin. He wrote a young adult book called Hoot that some of you may be familiar with. He's also written a ton of adult novels, which I'm not going to name today. And he was in Montana on vacation, fly fishing, and he happened to buy a self-published edition of Aragon from a local store, and he gave it to his then 12-year-old son, Ryan. And Ryan read the book, and he liked the book, and most importantly, he said that he liked the book. And as a result, his dad passed it off to an editor at Random House, and it bounced around there for a few months until my wonderful editor-to-be emailed me and said, Random House is interested in publishing the series. And because of that, you know, our lives changed completely. And I love telling that story because to me it really demonstrates the power of readers. If Ryan hadn't read the book and if he hadn't talked about it, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'm sure Aragon would have gotten published eventually, but not in the way it did and not on the timeline it did. And so for that, I've always been very, very grateful to both Carl and his son. And in fact, I was just a couple of days ago, I was in Miami at the Miami Book Fair, and Carl was there, and I got to go and shake his hand again, and he just looked at me. He's looked exactly the same for the last 20 years, but he just looked at me and he said, "You just turned 40. I'm getting old." But no, he's a great guy and a good author. From that point on, it was just an amazing experience of releasing Aragon with Random House and then racing through the rest of the books as fast as I could, promoting them, talking them, getting to meet amazing people all around the world, having some crazy experiences on book tour, like the one time I got chewed on by a marsupial, but that's a different story. And now, of course, we have Murtagh, and writing Murtagh was like returning home after a long journey. And I love these characters, I love this world, but I am going to blame the existence of this book on one of you. Because back in 2017, someone sent me a tweet. Are we still saying tweets? Yeah. Yes. What, he X'd me? Someone sent me a tweet pretty late at night and said, "Hey Christopher, can you tell us something about what Thorne and Murtagh are up to after the events of the inheritance cycle?" And it was past my bedtime and I was feeling a bit punchy. So, I paraphrased, I wrote back to him and said, "Oh, Murtagh just enchanted a fork and called it Mr. Stabby and won a fight with it. Thorne's pretty upset with him." The horrible thing is I couldn't stop thinking about that. And that ended up forming the basis for the story, The Fork, in The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. And when that book was released, I was in New York City, I had dinner with my editor, And so we're there, and I leaned over the table with a twinkle in my eye, and I said, "Hey, Michelle, I think I got a full-length book out of this." And she just went forward and she said, "Do it. Write it." So that's how Murtagh came to be. So I'm blaming its existence on one of you, but also thank you for that. All right, it's a bit rough on my throat shouting up here, but I did promise you some reading, so we're going to do that. Does anyone have a copy of Aragon I can borrow?
I do. I have one.
You have one. Well, then you can get it to me. Carrying a scent that would change the world. All right, who's got Elvis? And I'm going to try to do a good job of it, but I have to apologize because I have an absolutely horrendous Elvish accent. And that's because in the ancient language, you were supposed to roll your R's on the tip of your tongue the way you would in Spanish or Italian. And I can't do that. In fact, the only way I can roll my R's, apologize for this, the only way I can roll my R's is by wiggling my uvula. That's a thing in the back of your throat. So I'm going to wiggle my uvula, you guys. And I hope you like it, too. At Sterni onovelduen, Ranalifa uninharta honor, undue varinia onovarda. Of course, the other big language I invented for the series is the dwarf language, and that one I invented pretty much from scratch. And it's my favorite because it's just a rich, meaty language you can sink your teeth into. So I got a chunk of angry dwarvish here, where this dwarf is complaining about Aragon and Saphira being in the dwarvish mountains. So I'm going to read it for you, and unlike the ancient language, I have an excellent dwarvish accent. And that's because in the dwarf language, you are supposed to roll your R's by wiggling your U's. So let the wiggling commence. Karach. Jürgen Carmiter, dos eta groth bastardag, dur insisti rekiffen. Joch is werv as barzuligur, dur durgeimst as schwelden rak anuin, mog torak Jürgen friend. It has a lot of words in it. And those words make up a whole lot of sentences. Some of those sentences are better than others. There's one that involves a bumble-eating bumblebee that I probably should have cut. But out of the many, many sentences that make up this very large book, there's one in particular that is my absolute favorite. And to be modest, I just think it's really well written. I think it has a lot of literary merit. In fact, when I wrote this sentence, I felt as if I leveled up as an author. So do you want to hear my absolutely favorite sentence from Brissinger?
Yeah!
Okay. Die, puny human! Because what is the point of writing epic fantasy if you can't write a line like die, puny human every once in 1,000 pages? No point whatsoever. Okay, we're going to be fast on this one. I'm going to read you the very first line of the very first chapter of the very last book of the Inherited Cycle. The dragon Saphira roared, and the soldiers before her quailed. Now, I think we're going to skip the Fork, the Witch, and the Worm. A lot of people did. I kid. I'm going to have to do this one a little bit more quietly so I don't blow my throat out. Apologies for that. There shouldn't be any major spoilers in this one except for the fact that Murtagh and Thorn are still alive. So, hopefully that didn't ruin the book for you. Here we go. Careful to be quiet, Murtagh stood picked up Zarak from by his blanket, and walked a ways from their camp. The frost-laden grass crunched under his boots, a crisp, dry sound. He stood in an expanse of empty sward, chest up, shoulders back, staring forward into the future. An intake of frozen air, and he swept Zarak from its crimson sheath. In dawn's gray light, the sword's blade was a sharpened shard of iridescent red, a shimmering thorn of frozen blood, eager to cut and stab and kill. The blade of a rider, forged out of bright steel by an elven smith over a century past, and imbued with spells of strength and keenness and resistance. The finest weapon a warrior could hope to wield, and yet he regarded it with as much aversion as appreciation. A rider's blade, yes, but that rider had been Morzan, his father. And Morzan had used Zarak for many a black and bloody deed, as had Murtagh after him. Not for nothing had Morzan named the blade Misery in the ancient language. And true to its name, the sword had brought pain to many throughout the land, including Murtagh himself. Sometimes he wondered if he should have ever taken Zarak from Aragon. He shook off the thought. Whether he wanted it or not, Morzan's shadow would always lie upon him. And aside from his name and the scar on his back, Zarak was all he had from his father. It was a meager and hateful inheritance, but it was his alone, and for that he clung to it. He held the sheath in his offhand as he flowed through the familiar forms: step, cut, parry, turn, block, swing, lunge. He moved without thinking, his mind as still and empty as a windless lake on a cloudless day. Attack, defend, escape, beat and break, search the opening, make the cut, risk the stab. He used the sheath as a dagger, blocking, deflecting, wrapping the wrist, creating opportunities for a lethal blow. His skin warmed and his pulse steadied. He moved faster, pushing himself to maintain the pace of battle, every movement a whip snap of life-preserving, life-ending action. His lungs gave out before his arms. Unable to continue, he fell to his knees and braced the sheath on the ground. Zarak he placed across his thighs. As the first rays of light crept across the frozen grass, the egg-shaped ruby in Zarak's pommel refracted the beams, splitting them into glowing darts of red. Once his breath steadied, he stood, sheathed the blade, and staggered back to camp. Across the dead fire, Thorn watched. He sniffed as Murtagh came close. "You stink of fear." Murtagh grunted. "I know. I'll wash." He flinched as Thorn licked his elbow. Then he forced himself to relax and patted the dragon's head. Without a mic in a while. It's kind of fun. I'd love to answer a few questions before we get into the signing. So if you have a question, put hold up your hand. Yes.